guys, welcome back to The Funny Thing Is. I am your host, Nicole Birch, where every week we bring you a traumatic situation, the medicine you took to get better, and the funniest lesson you learned along the way. Today is no exception. Today we are talking about a really important topic. Why is everyone going sober? Have you guys noticed a trend? Because I know that I have. Not only have I noticed that, I am currently doing a 6-month sobriety test run. So let's see how that goes, right? So I've started noticing a trend. A lot of you know that I still bartend a couple shifts a week. Childcare is expensive, right? So I still work at my favorite watering hole that I started in like 2012 years ago. And I've had pretty consistent regulars. I've noticed that a lot of them are either going sober or not drinking as much or switching to ask for a mocktail or an iced tea. And then I've also noticed an uptick in the sober months, right? So like sober October, dry January. I've noticed an uptick in that more regulars are joining that kind of trend, which is fascinating to me because, again, I've known them for over a decade, and regulars that I didn't expect to do that are absolutely changing up their lifestyle, even if it is only for 30 days. And I'm sure the stock market is taking a hit because some of them can put it down. I'm talking about my friend Jill. Okay, so I wanted to give you guys some stats because I was asking some of my friends, other people who I knew that were trying to do a little bit more of a sober lifestyle, or what they're calling sober curious, which is the new popular term, what they felt about it. And they said that they've noticed a trend. A lot of their friends are doing it. My friend Holly and I are accountability buddies right now for the 6 months. We're at about, by the time this airs, we'll be about 2 months into it. So what's interesting to me is I started looking it up, and a few studies have been done. So I'm going to read those for you. So in 2024, a survey by NC Solutions said that 41% of Americans are trying to drink less or be sober curious. And that seems pretty high, right? And so a lot of that is, we'll get into the whys, the whos, and all that stuff. Mocktails have gone crazy since 2023. 2023 was the year of the mocktails. People coming out with I think Blake Lively has her own version of mocktails. I think Katy Perry does too. I'm not sure if she does or if she was just promoting one that she likes. I'm not a mocktail chick. We'll get into that also because that might kind of tell you, if you're like, mocktails, what's the point? That might tell you what your relationship is with alcohol more than you think. Because I had this conversation with someone who has always had a very healthy relationship with alcohol, maybe a champagne toast on New Year's or at a wedding, and maybe a glass of wine to wind down occasionally. She loves mocktails. She's like, I like to try different flavors. I don't care how much they cost. It doesn't really, she doesn't need it to be social. She's just curious of what it tastes like and isn't really about the alcohol. And my relationship with alcohol is I'm only willing to spend money and try new things if I know it's going to get me buzzed or checked out to a certain extent. I feel like there's a lot of air in the balloon, and occasionally I have to let that air out. And I've always associated that with either alcohol or food. So creating new patterns and relationships with alcohol is the new road we're on, guys. And a lot of other people are joining us. So also let me know in the comments and DM me anything that, if you're going through this right now, what it's been like for you, because we are going to do a follow-up episode on this at the end of our 6 months. So I also there's also been a huge uptick in the types of non-alcoholic beers. Again, I've been a bartender for over 20 years. Okay. I think all we had was St. Pauli Girl and O'Doul's. I don't even know if they make O'Doul's anymore. But now we have, even at our little dive bar, which has like no room for bottled beer, we have non-alcoholic Guinness, non-alcoholic Corona, non-alcoholic Heineken, non-alcoholic Stella. I said Corona, right? And then there's some other stuff that they're pitching us for. I think they're making non-alcoholic Baileys for St. Patrick's Day. Just drink a smoothie. I don't know what's going on there. I said Stella, right? So there's so many more types of non-alcoholic drinks that you can have if you need it as a crutch. But I also think it's kind of like vaping. It's not as bad as vaping. Like when they were trying to tell everybody, hey, smoking is bad for you. And you're like, okay. And then somebody came out with a vape. My first thought was, so you're still inhaling something into your lungs that isn't natural. That's going to have chemicals. That's going to do damage, right? I don't necessarily think that version with mocktails, but it is like, oh, you're just putting a bunch of sweeteners and juices and probably chemicals also into your body instead of just not doing that. But do I think mocktails are as bad as like the Juul and other vapes? No, I don't think that. I'm just saying it's like, oh, you're just using a crutch and the crutch might not be in your best interest also, if that makes sense. This is more about the who it's affecting the most. So in 2018, Berenberg's study found that Gen Z drinks 20% less per capita than millennials. 20% less. And then if you ask them if they're going to drink more when they get older or less, 95% of them said, oh, I'll probably drink less when I get older. And I remember thinking, oh, I'll probably just drink the same. I'll drink less than what I drank in college because nobody could challenge that person. But I would still have thought that I drink plenty. Do you know what I mean? Like my mom is a drinker. She doesn't get hangovers. That's another thing. There are people that exist on this planet that don't get hungover, which blows my mind. My friend Courtney, who's maybe, I don't know, 108 and 5'5", that girl never gets a hangover. I've seen her do body shots. I've seen her leave a party after 10 shots of tequila and like 4 wine coolers. Like everything that's supposed to give you a hangover. She wakes up the next morning and is like, oh, I'm going to do a Pilates class. What? I mean, honestly, if that was me, I'd probably keep drinking. My main issue, and we'll get to it, is the hangovers. Like I cannot function. And I think the newer generation is starting to see what it's like for the older generation. That we're not waking up so swift. We're kind of grumpy. Life's maybe not going as well for. I just don't picture my life going very well for me if I continue to drink at the pace I was 10 years ago. It would interfere with so much of my life now where maybe it didn't before because the hangovers aren't 2-3 hours. The hangovers are 2-3 days. I'm still throwing up 2 days later. Like that's where I'm at. And so what are we doing? We know it's a poison. We know there's no great way to drink alcohol. It's a toxin that's entering your body. Do you know what I mean? We know that. The hashtag Sober Curious has nearly 400 million views. That's insane. And I already talked about some of my own regulars, including one of my favorite regulars who's also my sound engineer and editor, Ron. He's going on 11 years sober. So a lot of people think, and he used to be the anomaly. He used to be the one where most people, if they quit alcohol, and he had an alcohol issue, like some people just, I don't think I'm an alcoholic, right? I don't drink very often. I have a kid now. I don't drink when she's around at all. It's always on her dad's weekend. It's always usually the day she goes to him, because that obviously ties into why I drink alcohol, is because I'm emotional and I need a place to put it. So I decide to dim it down with alcohol. And I've always made a pact because I don't want Everly to ever see me buzzed or drunk. That's just a personal thing. I grew up with people who drank alcohol, who are still drinking alcohol, and I just don't want it to be something that she experiences with me, because my biggest thing is if she needs to connect to me, or she needs to relate, or she just needs a bonding. She's 4, right? So when she's a teenager, it'll be different, because when she's a teenager, it's like, oh, she's going to call me with a question or a request or something, and I need to be present for her. Right now, I still need to be present. It's just I don't have to answer questions and stuff like that, but she wants to engage. And if you've ever been around somebody who's drunk and you're sober, engaging is not really a thing. It doesn't exist. It exists on a different planet where they think they're engaged and they're like totally connecting with you. And you as a sober person is like, who is this lunatic? Get away from me. Your breath smells. You know what I mean? So when it comes to Everly, like that's always been a no policy for me. So like, I don't want to do that. But it's interesting to me that other regulars can go years not drinking and still come into a bar. And let's be clear, I work at a bar. Some people are like, well, you serve food because it's also a restaurant. It's a bar. Like everybody that goes in there knows it's a bar. And Ron has been able to come in for over a decade and be fine. That's very unusual. But now I've got 2 or 3 other regulars who haven't, well, 2 of them I would say have not sworn off alcohol completely. But out of the last 3 months, I have maybe served them 2 bottle beers. The rest have been iced teas or water or Arnold Palmer's or something like that. A lot more people are learning how to not only function in a setting where there is alcohol around them, where there is the temptation, but they just personally are almost grounded in the fact that they don't need it and that they're confident enough to go out to socialize, to get their hit of social interaction, and then to go home. And it's not a thing. And nobody gives them crap. That's the thing, is a lot of people that go sober that get crap for it, I just don't understand. Probably in college, I was probably awful. If one of my sorority sisters or somebody that we were hanging out with was like, oh, I'm going sober tonight, as we're all sitting around playing card games or drinking games or whatever, I would probably be like, ugh, why? That's stupid. No, come on, here, have a shot. Probably in my 20s, but not anything past that. And obviously, if I knew that you wanted to be sober, I would support that in any way that I possibly could, because otherwise you're an asshole. Like, we know that. Okay, so a lot of the reason for why I think, and studies have shown, I don't know why I'm saying I think, like I've looked into it, and some of it's really obvious. Why do you think people are going sober in 2023 and 2024? Well, because we went through a global pandemic and people went hard. There was a lot of people that went really hard in 2020 and 2021. Lives were uprooted, man. Social interaction was down. And then if you did have a group of people that you could be social with, what were you guys doing? Everybody was drinking because it was like, oh, it was time to socialize. Like, if you had your own pot, that's what pots were doing. And I think now it's like, okay, well, I'd like to get some grounding. I'd like to get my feet back on the ground. People are either getting their jobs back, or now they also have inflation. So even if they did get their jobs back and their regular structure that they had in 2019 before the pandemic, even if they get that back, now you have inflation. So booze is not something you're going to want to spend money on. People can't even afford groceries, dude. I'm struggling. My fiance literally had to move in because we had 2 months of money left to live in Los Angeles. It's so expensive out here that he had to move in and help. So if I were to be like, hey, thanks for moving in and helping me pay rent, I'm just going to go get blasted, and spend in LA $50 to $100 just for myself. 50 for me and 100 if we went out as a couple. That's the antithesis of what we're trying to do, right? So that doesn't make sense. I am also really curious into the celebrities that are now going sober. A lot of the celebrities I've found were people that had problems, or there's like that screenshot or that like photo in the tabloids where they're like raging and they're like raw and they're like attacking a photographer, and you're like, oh, they might want to lay off the sauce. So of course there's a lot of those, but then there's people that just, and I have a friend who I remember, he told me, he goes, oh, I've never had a sip of alcohol. And he's an actor and he's funny and he's always at all the parties and he likes to dance and I don't know, it just did not fit the idea in my mind of what a sober person would be. Like, a sober person's not fun, right? Like, that's how I used to think. And now I'm like, oh, and once you meet someone that doesn't lean on alcohol at all, you start to get curious yourself. At least that's how it was for me. I do agree that a lot of it is we see what it's done to the generation before us. We have friends who've had parents that are alcoholics. I've had alcoholics that are in my family, not necessarily bloodline wise, but that have married into, and watching what that does to older generations. And I'm talking up into the 70s, and what that looks like now, it ain't pretty. And so you're like, oh, I don't want that. And everybody that has it, they're running away from something. They're not facing something. And boy, what a hard thing to fix. Because if there's something out there that is so bad that you don't want to face it, and it's easier to just drink something or eat something or smoke something, you're kind of like, let them do it. You want to like let them do it just for a little bit to ease that kind of anxiety and pain. But then when it becomes a habit and they never face that, then that's, that's where the problems start. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is a side note. I want to be very clear about this because like I just said, the celebrities, and we'll get into those in a bit. Celebrities, you can tell there's a tablet. Like imagine being Miley Cyrus or something, and you went out on a bender, and then your photos spread all across People magazine of you like taking a bat to a car, and you're like raw, and you're just raging. You'd wake up in the morning and you would look at that and you would go, whew, man, I think I need to get a handle on this. There's evidence, there's proof, it's in your face, absolutely. I myself, and this is for people, and I know there's people like me out there, no one was ever going to tell me to stop drinking. I am fun. I hear a lot of people that are like, oh, I became a different person. I did too. And she's fun. And she's a great time. She's kind of a woohoo girl, but not annoying. She believes in you. She's going to help you make your entire business plan. She's going to tell you you can do anything. Girl, you don't need to date that guy. Let me give you a 10-point essay on what you can do with your life instead of focusing on that douchebag. I am your best friend. I am everybody's best friend when I am drunk. So how do you tell someone like that, hey, it's still a problem? You don't. I had to do it myself because I was tired of the hangovers. And it's interesting that the part of your personality that turns on when you're drunk, you become this thing that you need to be for yourself. Sometimes it's a bitch. Sometimes if you're a rude bitch, it's because you don't get to be in your sober life. Or maybe you have to be. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe you're not standing up for yourself enough when you're sober. So you have a few drinks and you're like, now I can definitely stand up for myself. Or, if you're crying, oh my gosh, I always say, so I had my mom, my dad, and my stepmom growing up. And my dad's a fighter. He's Irish, so he's a fighter. So that's what happens when he drinks. My mom's emotional and she thinks back into the past. So she'll be sitting there crying, be like, oh God, I miss high school and college. Can you believe we did that? Remember when you were a little girl? And she gets very emotional. And then my stepmom was the life of the party. The woo, can't wait to like, so I had an array of examples of what alcohol could do to a person. I became more of the woohoo party girl. I don't think it was by choice. I don't think it was like I looked at those three and I thought, well, this is the best scenario. There is just something that clicks on that makes me feel euphoric, that makes me feel happy, that makes me, allows myself to forget what I'm going through and to just tune in and be present. And when you can do that, you're fun. You're having a great time. Why would you want to stop doing that, right? I think if you kind of touch in on what kind of person you become when you drink, why do you need to be that person? Who knows? Maybe it has nothing to do with it. Maybe everybody just has a different personality trait when they're drunk. But I think there's something there. Because I also it's like, well, what would my mom get out of being emotional? It's like, because she misses the past and now she gets to talk about it and people will listen. Where me as a daughter is more like, nah, let's listen to look at the future. I don't want to hear about the past. It's over. It's done. Let's go. I'm very future oriented. But when we drink together, we talk about the past. It's crazy. I don't know. So the next question was, where are we seeing most of this happen? Where are we seeing the majority of people who want to become sober? It's mostly the coastal regions. It's also like the metropolitan areas, the big cities. Of course, that's where most stats start, right? But it is also bleeding equally into the Midwest, the South, the North. It's still affecting it. It's just the numbers are just bigger on the coast because there's more people. That's where they get better stats. So I will say, and I talked about this, if you go last season, I cannot remember which episode it was. It was season 1 with Hunter Cope, and he talked about his story with a DUI. I also shared that I had a DUI when I was 20, which was 22 years ago. Awful, terrible, full of regrets about it. Should have never done it. Thank God nobody got hurt. Thank God I didn't get hurt. A huge lesson. I will say that I understand how sometimes those lessons work for people, and I also understand how sometimes they don't. I know somebody who's had like 4, which I think he doesn't he lives in Kansas City, but with 4 DUIs. What are we doing? That's a intentional, either a habitual thing or intentional at some point. You know what I mean? But if you listen to that episode, Hunter really goes into how it all went down, but the things he learned about himself afterwards, what he was using alcohol as. I think it's a really great episode because he also gets into therapy and kind of falls in love with his therapist emotionally and tries to please him as if the therapist was replacing his dad. And there's just so many psychological levels to alcoholism, alcohol use, that we really touch on in that episode. So I won't go into it too much just because we already have. But I understand the need to, the balloon gets full, right? Anxiety, pressure, social, tension gets full, and you need to let some out. And we're taught in society that that's the way to do it. Every Miller Lite commercial, every, the Nick's tequila that's coming out, all of these, it's like, hey, sometimes some of it's you're just sitting, having a drink with your friend, maybe a cigar, just a relaxing night. Some of it's you're playing volleyball and you're slamming a Miller Lite, but you're having fun with your friends. And what's interesting to me in all of those commercials is people are so connected to each other and grounded. And it's showing alcohol in a way that's like, hey, this is bringing us together and this is uniting us. When in fact, after 3 of those, you're not going to remember, not that you're not going to remember it, but after 30 of those, you won't. So your intention to have a good night with friends and to socially bond and to get together, if you go past a certain line, it's all washed away anyway. So it's like, what are you willing to take without losing that? Do you know what I mean? I will share this story. So during the pandemic, Everly and I, we kept my place out here in LA, but then we went to Kansas City to ride out the pandemic, which I thought was going to be 2 weeks, on my mother's 5-acre property where Everly could run around and be with cousins, just because COVID basically didn't exist out there, if you know what I mean. Nobody was really fazed by it. Things were still up and running. They were tables were socially distanced, but you could still go inside. It was just a different life. So we ended up staying out there 5.5 months because, as we know, the pandemic definitely lasted more than 2 weeks. And Craig had flown out to visit, and I had not had a drop of alcohol since she was born. And the tension with the pandemic, I had found out that a project of mine that was the only financial thing I had going for me at the time, I had found out that it was stolen. Anyway, it was like Bummer City. And again, I didn't want to drink in front of Everly. So I was waiting for him to get there. And it was like a heroin addict, I imagine, where I was waiting for him to come in so that I could go out with my family. I knew he was going to watch her. I knew he was going to take care of her. I think I should have been more clear on the dynamics of it, because he came over to my mom's house instead of taking her out of the house. So we went out, and I have a family that's never going to tell you to stop drinking. In fact, they're going to pour you another shot. They're fun time gals. So, and that's what happened. And after not drinking that much and having low blood platelet counts, and probably definitely should not have been drinking at the time, not that I knew any of my health history at the time, but I was so hammered, and I mean blackout drunk. And I remember waking up, it was day drinking, so we started at 10 a.m. I remember waking up at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. at night in my mom's bed. Oh, I have so much shame telling the story. Oh, it's so gross. And I remember my mom going, "How you feeling?" And I was like, "I'm good. How's Everly?" And she's like, "Oh, I just put her to bed." And I was like, "She's here?" She's like, "Yeah." And then I started watching the videos. Everly was never really around me, but she was in the room or in the kitchen. I was so drunk that video alone, I think I didn't drink for 4 months. And even then, I'd have like maybe a glass of wine or something like that. Because I was like, you have this baby to take care of. Again, I was like, why didn't Craig take her to another location? Like, why would he let her see me like this? But we hadn't talked about it. And Craig doesn't have parents that have a relationship with alcohol. He doesn't come from a family of drinkers at all. So he wouldn't know that dynamic. And, talking to him the next day, he's like, yeah, you were really drunk. And they just kept trying to give you alcohol. And he was like, I didn't know what to do. And I was like, okay, well, in that situation, and I thought about saying this to him. I was going to say, next time, make sure you take Everly with you. And then I thought, why the fuck would there be a next time? Does that make sense? I was like, I'm never doing that again. The fact that she even saw me for a moment like that, granted, she was 7 months old. Like, I will carry that with me, which is why she's never seen me buzzed, drunk. I mean, I don't even have a glass of wine. I don't have a single drink. If I'm coming home to her, even if she's already in bed asleep, like if I had a babysitter or Matt was with her and she was already in bed asleep, I don't have anything anymore. Like it's just a hard no. It's an easy hard no. It's easy to, and that's interesting because I'm doing it for somebody else, I think, is when I'm out and somebody's like, hey, do you want a drink? And I know that I have her just in my house at all. I'm like, oh no. And then somebody brought this up. This could maybe work for other parents. What if an emergency happened in the middle of the night and you had to rush them to the hospital? And I was like, yeah, I don't even get that far. I mean, that helps a lot of people. So I'm saying that in case it helps somebody, that's true. Like, what do you do if you're hammered and your kid needs something, or your kid Everly has croup all the time. She's coming out of it now because she's like 4.5. So I guess her airways expand or whatever. But I don't even need to get that far. It's literally like, I just don't ever want her to see that version of me. Ever. Ever. So, I don't know. That's me. And that probably tells you about my history, right? Another thing is, in present day, Matt and I have been together it'll be 2 years in May, okay? 2 years at the end of May, Memorial Weekend. We've only gotten into 2 big fights. And in both of those situations, I was drunk. I mean, and he doesn't even want me to stop drinking. He's like a casual beer drinker. He doesn't really drink hard alcohol. And with me, he's like, oh, if you want to go out. He also doesn't care. He's like, I'll support you no matter what, which is, thank God, what a great partner. But he's like, I'm not saying you have to stop drinking. I'm just saying that when you drink, sometimes you hit a switch and I can't control you. And again, I'm a lot of fun. So when I'm having so much fun and you're like, we need to go home right now, I'm like, no, I don't want to go home. And other people will intervene and be like, dude, she's having so much fun. Just let her have fun. Because again, Nicole Normal can kind of be a bitch and can kind of be, I'm moody. I'm a moody person. Now, do I think that I have like nice qualities and I care about you and I will always support you and I will give you the best of the best advice that I possibly can? Absolutely. But sometimes I wake up on the wrong side of the bed, okay? And I get a little moody. The point of that is, when I drink, I'm a good time gal, okay? I'm a lot of fun. So when somebody's trying to get me to leave and there's 10 other people there seeing this version of me that's a blast, they're like, man, you can't take her home. Why don't you go home? We'll put her home in an Uber. We'll send her home in an Uber. Don't you worry, we got her. And it just creates chaos. And so I realized it wasn't helping my relationship. Not that it was destroying it, but I was like, the same way I am with Everly, where I do not want to be a parent that is disconnected from her at all, is the same way. I'm already disconnected with my phone, you guys. That's the new thing, is that as soon as I come home, I have to put the phone away. When I wake up in the morning, I have to wait till I've taken her to school before I can even have the phone on, unless it's to play her, the soundtrack to Cinderella, which is her new thing. They're like, Cinderella, like that's her new thing. But I'm already finding ways where society alone just detaches me from her, or I've got so much going on in my brain that I'm like, yeah. And I'm kind of zoned out while she's dancing to Frozen for the 30th time that day, I already have enough things taking me away from her, from being really connected to her. So I'm not going to add any more to it. Then I think about Matt, who is another huge, important person in my life. This is our family. So I don't want to do that with him either, right? And that's something that's really important to me. And I think in friendships too, I mean, there's friends that I have that I'm like, hey, we were best friends when we were drinking martinis till 4 o'clock in the morning. Do we talk now? No. What's not interesting, a lot of them are like me. They're doing like sober October, dry January. They're doing the 6 months or a year, or they're working a program. And the fascinating thing with me is like, we're still not friends. We even did the same trajectory, but we're still not friends. That's also because we don't live anywhere near each other. But it's interesting that some relationships exist only because of alcohol. That's my point. Also, as far as like AA and Al-Anon. So Al-Anon is the group that people go to if they are related to or affected by other people who are alcoholics. I did a few Al-Anon group meetings, and it really did help. It helped to be in front of a group of other people that were like, oh, this is what it does. So I've also seen the effects of what alcoholism does to other people, not only from myself personally, but stories that are way worse than my stories, and the abuse that can happen in like the extreme circumstances where you're like, oh, I really don't want to bring that into my kid's life or my friend's life or my husband's life, any of that. I don't want any of it. I do think that those programs can work for you. They help a lot of people, man. They really do. I personally am one of those people who, if I go through like the 12 steps once, I don't need to keep going back and doing it. I do think for me that would cause more damage than good, because if I have to keep revisiting the bad stuff in my life, there's something, what's that quote? If you want a wound to heal, stop touching it. There is a little bit of that, because there were people that had been working the program for 20 or 30 years. And this is Al-Anon. I've never been to AA, but this is Al-Anon. And there are people that have been working 20 or 30 years who are in their 50s and 60s. And they're still talking about their dad and that one time that he did this thing. And their dad has been dead for 15 years. And I think, that's rough. That I don't know how to help with that. And I don't know how you get over that kind of hurt. But I also think that if you keep revisiting certain situations and keeping them alive, then there's no chance for you to move on. That's my personal opinion. You guys can come at me with all the hate comments. I'm ready for them. Oh, here's a list of the celebrities we were talking about that are sober. And some podcasts for you guys to listen to that really, or just things for you to, not podcasts, but things for you to listen to that really help me. So like Daniel Radcliffe, Eva Mendes, Bradley Cooper, Miley Cyrus, Blake Lively. Blake Lively is the one who has her own mocktails company. Naomi Campbell, Drew Barrymore. I would suggest listening to Jay Shetty's podcast with Tom Holland, because when Tom Holland, I think he was doing Dry January. And then at the end of Dry January, he was like, ooh, I was still feeling that itch. Like I needed a drink. I needed it. So he's like, nah, all right, it's the end of January. I'm going to do February too. And then I think he kept doing it until June, but he has a really good perspective on it because he wasn't an alcoholic, but he just realized what it was taking from his life. That is a brilliant episode. And then another one is Anne Hathaway. And Anne Hathaway, it's not a podcast. I cannot remember. If you guys remember this, write in. But Anne Hathaway was on a late night show. It might have been Jimmy Kimmel. And I think they asked, she said something like, oh, I'm sober now. And he's like, oh, why is that? And she goes, well, I'd had a few glasses of wine at dinner one night. We had a dinner party and then everybody left. And then the next morning it was, I always drive either like with her husband or somebody to take her kid to school. And she goes, I remember being hung over in the car and saying goodbye to my kid and him just being like, you feel okay, mommy? And she was just like, oh, I don't. So she's like, I'm just going to wait till they're 18 and out of the home. And if by then I really want to drink, then maybe I'll have one, but probably not, you know? She just didn't want to be that person in front of her kids. And I think that resonated with me a lot because not only do I never want to be drunk in front of Everly, but also the hangovers. Like when you're throwing up in a toilet, I had somebody tell me this one time because I still get sick like the next day. And it's not drinking all night like it used to be. It's like 3 glasses of wine in 2 hours and I am wrecked. Where before, it'd be like 3 glasses of wine in 30 minutes. Do you know what I mean? But I remember like this was 10, 15 years ago. I'd gotten so sick the next day from a wedding. We'd been at a wedding. And I was getting sick in the toilet. And my girlfriend, Kelsey, was like, oh, isn't it crazy that you drank so much that you made yourself sick, the same type of sick that somebody that has a virus or a bacterial infection or somebody who's on chemo. Like the way she was saying it, she was like listing everything that would make a normal human vomit. And she was like, and you did that to yourself on purpose. Isn't that crazy? And I was like, dang. Also, she said this while she was drinking a mimosa. So that was way messed up. But I was like, yeah, no, that's true. I'm literally putting my body through the ringer. And most people are trying to avoid getting sick and live a healthy life. Like, that's crazy. All while drinking a mimosa. All right, that's a wrap for today, guys. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon. If you do, you'll hear the rest of what people have written in, the stories they have shared about their alcohol adventures, some crazy, crazy stories, including one of my own. Did I drink 2 bottles of Boone's Farm and pee on top of my ex's Pathfinder in front of 70 fraternity guys? You betcha. So don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon to hear the full details. We'll see you then.